So, welcome to our Brownbag seminar this week. This is becoming a regular virtual online series. I'm very glad to welcome today Pengfei, who is a PhD student at St. Andrews University. He's currently a BPAC visiting fellow here at the Center for Southeast European Studies of the University of Graz. And he is researching on the engagement of China more broadly in Europe, and particularly for the purposes of our fellowship and today's presentation, looking at China's engagement in Southeastern Europe and the Western Balkans, and is going to explore a little bit the question of what is that engagement conflictual or complementary to the Europeanization of the region? And of course, this is a topic which has gotten maybe even more attention since the beginning of the pandemic. So without further ado, Pengfei, I'll give you the floor and looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Florian. Good day, everyone, and nice to have you all here. Today, my presentation is about Europeanization amid China's engagement in Western Balkans. And I've chosen a very realistic kind of title, Friend of Foe. I think that is a very convenient title for us to delve into the engagement of China's in Western Balkans and how the EU will perceive China's engagement in Western Balkans. First of all, I would like to show the outline of my presentation. It's gonna be, first I will have a very quick review of how Europeanization I will use in my presentation, and especially the Europeanization regarding Western Balkan countries. After that, I think it's quite important for me to introduce you some of those, or especially sharing you some of the information of China's engagement. I will looking into China's engagement through the connectivity agenda, and the connectivity agenda, I think that is quite important lens how the EU will perceive China's engagement in the neighborhood. And the fifth part, I'm gonna delve into the EU and China, especially in this region, the doorstep of the EU, how the EU will handle or perceive China's engagement in the Western Balkan countries. And the sixth part is the prospects. Always, sometimes we have to figure out how the relations will develop in the near future, and the conclusions references. Well, first of all, I mean, Europeanization is quite a diversified concept, a lot of definitions being given. For example, I mean, Delante and Rumford just give a very sociological one that is said it's a graduated and a highly indeterminate process of social construction. So in these aspects, Europeanization is a way to construct a social space, while for Bacon and Grant, it is a transformative regime. It emphasizes the transformative aspect of Europeanization, be it materially or ideologically. And Schimmelpfennig said it includes promoting regional integrated liberal democracies beyond its borders. So that's why I've chosen Europeanization, especially in the external governance. For sometimes when we, for example, EU studies, we always focus on how the Europeanization going on that is between the member states. But another important aspect of Europeanization is how the external governance, the EU, gonna focus in the neighborhood or even in the distant neighborhood. And Boris and Hees said is the spread of the EU policies and institutions. So summarize all these kind of ideas regarding Europeanization. I think that simply put, Europeanization can be summarized as the EU's diffusion of normative power in the supranational fashion with which to transform member and non-member entities, including states and non-state actors. It is simplified, if not very oversimplified, but it's very important for the EU, especially in the Western Balkans nowadays, to diffuse the ideas how the EU as an economic and social model, and how the EU will interact with the non-member states, for example, China, as a new player in Western Balkan countries. So that's why it's also very important that we have to know how the EU perceive Western Balkan countries. At a focus on the connectivity agenda, so it's very important. First of all, Western Balkans countries is an overlapping region with a lot of very fragmented 6 countries packed in the region, and it's also a regional corridor of the Caspian oil and migration. Definitely, regarding energy, that is Caspian oil. It's a very important part or geopolitical importance of the Western Balkan countries to the EU. While migration is also a kind of a corridor, but it's legally perceived. So we can see chronologically that actually Western Balkans to the EU from the 1990s or the end of 1990s, it's kind of an agenda from the peace to prosperity. After the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, Western Balkans, the EU wanted to stabilize this region. So that's why in 1999, the stabilization and association process, it's more of an agenda to stabilize this region. But at the time, there's no specified agenda to reconcile every or each conflictual parties. It is until the early 2000, especially in the Thessaloniki summit, EU has confirmed a little bit that is the EU gonna have the candidate be granted to the Western Balkan countries. And I'm focused on the energy and transport. This I will consider it into 2 dimensions of the connectivity agenda. The transport is very important. Even the CETO, the Southeast Europe Transport Observatory, it's now changed in 2017, being a transport community. It's a regional initiative and based in Belgrade. Another one is the energy community that is based in Vienna. For the transport community, it's a little bit new compared with energy community. I mean, as a regional initiatives, some scholars just said the energy community is the only legally binding regional initiatives in the Western Balkan state countries. So it's very important that we focus on how the energy community can contribute to the region, and EU is a very important part of this community, how the EU can do that part. We can see that the energy community is focused on energy issue. It is modeled on the Europe coal and steel community that is dating back to 1940s or 50s. At that time, it is more of a project. We always said functional way to construct a region in the Western Balkan countries. It is said if we start from the low politics issues like energy, and gonna have the spillover effect in the future, so the region can be integrated in the near future or in the foreseeable future. So the EU at this moment is more focused on how the regional initiatives can be constructed from the less political sensitive issues like energy community or the transport community. And EU is very important part. While for China's engagement, it is we can say it's a new phenomena. By new, I mean, although China that is getting back to 1970s, China is very active in Albania, but at that time it is more politically motivated. While nowadays, at least China say, China's engagement in this region is economically driven or have the business rational. So for China's engagement in this region is also, we can understand it can be a corridor or it can be a destination. If we perceive it as a corridor, we should find a destination, and majority of those scholars gonna say Western Europe or the EU actually is the destination. Chinese products or the Chinese government wanted to have the go out policy, and it's very important for the Chinese product to find a corridor and then to the EU. And some of them just said debate is a destination, but so far at the destination, we always think for the Chinese, said it's the business rational. We will think about how big the Western Balkan countries as a market will be for China. Comparatively, it's not very profitable. So I just divided 6 Western Balkan countries into 2 parts. And the first one is, I mentioned Albania. Well, nowadays Albania is it's a little bit different from another 5. For Albania is more private-owned Chinese companies or private investment very active in Albania. For example, the airport or the oil drilling, and this kind of assets all bought by the private Chinese company. So it's a little bit different. So my focus is going to be at another 5. Another 5, it is less profitable and most focused on the infrastructure or the reindustrialization. And the Chinese companies, most of them are the state-owned investment. And more important, it differentiates Albania from another 5 is Albania for that is 17+1. That is it's more urge the Chinese small or medium enterprise to invest in this region. So from Tallinn to Tinara, 17+1 is more of a project and comprise a lot of Chinese small and medium enterprises. While for the BRI, I mean Belt and Road Initiatives, and West Balkan is a very important part of the maritime corridor for China's BRI project. So I'm going to focus on another 5. I said, put a concept of a word, reachability. As of 2018, China's enterprises or the state-owned investment in this region is around 2,000, but it's quite visible in this region. For first of all, the infrastructure, no matter it's infrastructure or the reindustrialization, we need some of those. It's all materially. So it also reminds me 2 or 3 years ago when I was in Montenegro, is in some maybe 2 hours drive from Podgorica, and I've seen some Chinese laborers working on a road to build a new road somewhere. that's quite surprised. I mean, I'm not expect so many Chinese workers working in a country. Not many Chinese people even know that on the map. So, but China's visibility in this region has been differently perceived by a lot of scholars. And some of them just say, especially compare the volume of the investment in this region between China and the EU. Definitely, China is not a game changer. China's engagement in this region will not say, okay, gonna expel. I mean, it's a wishful thinking. So China is not a game changer, but I think it's a motivating factors. Motivating is very important. Even I mean, foreign also talked about the pandemic. Last week, the Zagreb summit, and the EU has earmarked 3.3 billion euros to for the region to develop. I think China's engagement in this part, although it is recent years that it has have a very visible role, but it is before the financial crisis. That is before that is 2007, 2009. China at that time already have some of made the foray into Western Balkan countries, but at that time. The EU is also very active in that part after the we call the big bang of the CE countries. But the economic crisis or the financial crisis just dented the EU's the majority of the project in this region. It is until 2012 that is the 7+1 and 2013 the BRI project China gonna put more focus, put more weight on this region. Then the EU realized we have to do something. It's also the same case after the pandemic, and when Serbia said we wanted some help, kind of extra help, then turned to China, and then the EU gradually said, okay, we have to refocus or re-engage in this part, or else it is always said it's a competition for narratives. So I would always like to say China is a motivating factor to this part. And I'm going to focus on two sub-projects, and it's all within the connectivity agenda, energy and transport. Among those around 20 Chinese state-owned projects in the Western Balkans countries, energy and transport, especially the transport, is a very significant part of China's investment. Energy includes the generation and transmission. It's a little bit different from the EU's Caspian oil corridor, but it's also one part of it. For EU always emphasize the importance of energy security, while the generation and transmission is one part of it. Transport, that is port and bridge and road. It is estimated around 75% of the Chinese investment in the Western Balkan countries is in Serbia, especially in Serbia, the bridge building, the road construction, while the port definitely is, we always know that is something at that time the news is very eye-catching. It's in Greece, and so that's why it is always said it's also one part of the Chinese or the Balkan Silk Road from the port to Hungary, or to make a final entry point to the EU. And in 2018, and it's very small, and you all also notice there is another aspect of the connectivity, is the digital connectivity, but I will focus on energy and transport. Both energy and transport projects ask for substantial financial investment, know-how, information. if the Western Balkan countries choose the EU approach, definitely the EU financial resources, the multi-source financing schemes always come with a series of compliance rules. And some of them just said is kind of near-colonial implications. But the Chinese approach, some of them like it a lot, is that it's quick, easy, with no claimed political conditionality. But also worried some of those observers in this region is also regarding the debt trap diplomacy, labor regulation, environmental standards, and corruption allegation. Um, Even in the CEE, for example, in Poland, when the highway construction at that time has been into the legal issues regarding corruption. So it's very important for, if there is anything that we can combine the EU approach and the Chinese approach. And it's quite interesting that it is in 2015, the EU and China actually founded the connectivity platform. We can make a rough demarcation between the role the EU and China can do in the connectivity platform in 2015. Well, connectivity can be divided into two parts. And soft connectivity, it means the development of a single investment space. That's the part the EU always underlined the importance of the rule of law. And the hard connectivity, it means the physical infrastructure. That is China always very good at it. But the status quo, it is the situation is the Western Balkan countries are more advanced in economic reform than the rule of law. So it means the soft connectivity is not the case, at least as the EU wish to see. So the lack of the rule of law also been mentioned in the EU's enlargement policy from 2016 to 2020. At very first, it is said it's state capture, and then it delineated as a lack of a political will. And nowadays, it is said it's structural weakness. And Florian's book, I mean, this is the recent I've read, is also mentioned most of the governments in the countries of the Western Balkans have moved to more authoritarianism over the past decade, despite the formal progress toward European Union accession. So for China and EU, it's very important for China, it's very important for the investment can find a very stable situation, and for the EU to make up the financial provision or the under provision, it's very important to attract some of the external actors. Regarding the last decades or around 2 decades, and the way paved regarding energy and transport community, China indeed have done some of those projects in the region, no matter if it's hydropower or the thermal power in Bosnia. And the connection or find of some of the compatibility between the Trans-European transport network and the Balkan Silk Road. For example, some of them in North Macedonia and in Serbia, especially some of the remarkable one, as in some of the Chinese media, is the Belgrade and Budapest Railway. Always wanted to have it as a model or as a successful cooperated project in the region, can serve as an example for the future projects. So when we look ahead, China and the EU definitely going to have a lot of conflicts regarding how can cooperate in a very constructive way in the region. And indeed, the EU is good at policy innovation, and also have considered some of the joint ventures. And China also are good at and also make some initiatives. So the third party market cooperation. I would like to say it's not Chinese uh, way at the very beginning, say to cooperate with some of the external actors is triggered or is incentivized by the EU's um, emphasis of the rule of law or regulation. So nowadays, in the third-party market cooperation, Austria, France, and even Japan have participated in this cooperation. It means that when China invests some money or invests some of the projects in this region, those participant countries can also join this program. The last one is public-private partnership, but it's a high cost. So cost-wise, it's not very feasible, but it's really good to try it out when the authority or the state level confidence is not that enough. We should consider how the cooperation or coordination can be carried out. So public-private partnership is very important, or at least it's a way to try it out. And then back into the title, I said is a friend or foe. I said it's a very convenient understanding or the beginning of understanding, but it's also a very realist way to understand how the EU and China can interact in this region. At least we will say, oh, the EU is not a realist or neo-realist project, according to some scholars. So if we can conclude EU's perception of the China's engagement in this region, if the EU adhere to the realist way, then the first one is 一山不容二虎 is the Chinese, literally translated, it means two tigers cannot accommodate it in the same mountain, or the town is too small for two players. It's gonna be a zero-sum game. And another way is the so-called win-win-win for all participants, the EU, China, and West Balkan states. It's more of a kind of a constructivist way said, okay, let us forget how the ideology kind of factors conflict with each other. Let's just focus in a more pragmatic way to invest and coordinate. The EU can play its part to increase or to stabilize this region by providing more normative guidance in this region, while for China can increase its investment only in that in this very stable situation can the Chinese investment be insured, or at least for the long term. It's not in the short term. So that is also why it's a little bit different from Albania. For the situation in other five West Balkan countries, the investment is long term, is not profitable. So the EU or the Europeanization set in motion in these regions are very helpful to China's engagement as well. So to conclude, I'd like to say, for the EU to perceive China's engagement, it is always said how you will perceive China or China's engagement in this region is always a mirror. If you look into the mirror and you will see yourself as a friend, then you might have the possibility to cooperate very well with China. If you perceive yourself as a foe with China, the situation will not be very optimistic. From China's perspective, EU is a very important part. So I would like to neither friend or foe can describe the EU and China's relations in this region or the Europeanization amid China's engagement. It is more of a partnership. Some of them just claim it's gonna be a partnership, not easy. Definitely, it will not be very easy. But it is also very happy to see that years ago, at least EU has the Europe and Asia collectivity, while China's project is one part of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I think you can now turn off the screen share so we can see. Yes, thanks for these insights, and I guess to some degree, to take your metaphor of maybe two tigers can't share a mountain, but an elephant and a tiger can share a mountain. So if they are different creatures, so to speak, in many ways, I guess this is what you're alluding to. If they're complementary rather than competing, this is possible. There are, of course, a number of questions you've raised yourself in this complementarity. But before I ask any questions, I would like to ask our audience to see if there are any questions you have regarding this presentation. If you agree, if anything you would like to see clarified. Sonia, go ahead, turn on the microphone and the camera and you can ask us a question.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. It was amazing because I have a strong interest into the presence of China into the region, especially Croatia, Macedonia, and Serbia, because I'm also coming from Macedonia. I have a question from Mr. Ho. What is your position regarding the some kind of ignorance that the European Union is expressing towards Serbia and Macedonia, not only regarding the economical support, but also the political behavior towards European Union, from European Union towards the Balkan? And is there any kind of danger from their ignorance to the Balkan to little bit push those kind of these states towards China, because there are significant investments from China in Serbia, and also you have mentioned investments in Macedonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Please.
Okay, Sonia, thanks for your question. And I mean, you've delineated a kind of tug of war between China and EU. But as I say, China is not a rival. And another side, for example, in this side is the EU, and another side is not China. China is only, and there are Russia and Turkey. So, before I start this seminar, I just checked the Chinese media, how the Chinese media perceive the Western Balkan countries in these 1 or 2 weeks. The Xinhua News Agency, part of it, that is focused on the Zagreb summit, and it's also mentioned. But if you have paid attention to the Zagreb summit and the final document, there is one part that said the EU and the West Balkan countries have to cooperate to prevent all the third country or third parties disinformative information. I think that's a part. Not only China or Russia or Turkey have to pay attention. For mostly accused China, Russia, and some, for example, recently Iran always said it's the part of this informative party wanted to kind of disturb the whole region. So if the EU, you said, will push this region where it were to, I'm always doubt it were to China, to Russia, or to Turkey. I would like to say not possible. For the gravity of the EU is very it's very significant. None of those countries in this region can make a choice, if it is an either or choice, said, I wanted to go only one part, they always have to make a balance how they can, you can say, play the game, how you can play the game between all the participants, the EU and China and all some other participants. So also mentioned that is China is only a motivator, can increasing the engagement in the region can only motivate the EU said, okay, I've noticed we should do something. That's also why the EU, no matter it's the pandemic and after the economic crisis, increasing the engagement in this region, especially financially. So, I mean, depends on how you will perceive the situation, then you would decide who is the other player at the end of the rope in this tug of war. Thanks.
Thank you. That's interesting, and I'm going to ask a question about that in a second, but I just want to see who else might be interested in asking a question at this particular point in time, because there's lots of food for thought, but at the moment people are still a little bit shy. Let me ask you, because I mean, one thing you mentioned, the media reporting in China. I mean, I'm kind of curious about how is the Western Balkans talked about? Because of course, as you know, I mean, especially in Serbia, President Vučić has been very much praising during especially the early phase of the pandemic, Chinese assistance, and has been kind of embracing China. And again, I think unlike what you're saying, that China is not an alternative, but rather complementary, the rhetoric often sounds like alternatives in the region from the regional actors. So I'm kind of very curious about how are Chinese media or officials, when they talk about the Western Balkans, talking about this region, in particular in regard to the European Union?
Thanks, Farid. Yeah, regarding Serbia, it is, especially after, I mean, in recent times, it is it's kind of anniversary for the, I mean, NATO's just bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. And China always a very, I mean, the media called brotherly relationships with Serbia. So that's also why there's around 75% of the Chinese investment in Serbia, especially considering the steel company that is auctioned only $1 from the US company back to the Serbian government and then take over by the Chinese company. And now they have a profitable. And it's very popular in the Chinese media or even the social media, for example, TikTok. And Vučić's reaction and, I mean, kind of gestures to kiss the Chinese national flag praised by the Chinese netizens. But for the Chinese national media, the Xinhua News Agency, in last week, that is a report, the Zagreb Summit, it is said nowadays the EU's merged in the different kind of difficulties caused by the pandemic and the lack of coordination. So China always keep an eye, a very cautious eye, how the Western Balkans will go in the near future, how the integration will go in the near future. So you've also mentioned that in your book, this region is, sometimes you will say it's kind of lack of law. You call it autocrats or the Balkan prince. China always, the external engagement always have the principles, non-interference principle. That's the issue for China as well, especially in Western Balkans. How, for it is always, it's a kind of a political investment. I always think these kind of economic projects also kind of a political investment. So long the pro-Chinese politicians, for example, Vučić, is in his position, or else the radical right or some other parties pro-democracy all said we don't want the Chinese engagement in this region. China has no kind of tools or instrument to deal with this kind of a situation. So it is always count on the EU. How will you stabilize this region and give the Chinese investment more certainty? So China nowadays is still thinking how China's engagement will be when the integration, the Chinese media said, the integration might not be the case in the foreseeable future. So how China will react or how China will cooperate with EU when this region is lack of membership.
Thanks. I think what I really, in your answer, was struck by, which is a real challenge, is the fact that the Chinese principle of non-interference and the kind of not picking the partner, but basically working with governments and not trying to shape the way they govern, whether it's democratic or not, and how, and so on, is of course one which has been very important for Chinese foreign policy. But it's quite interesting then when you have political leaders like Vucic, who kind of so much embrace China at the moment, and as a result kind of push the opposition to be critical of China, because the ruling, so in a certain way, this non-interference, of course, can be instrumentalized by rulers, who then, of course, it's easy to see why then China would favor a president, a government which is pro-Chinese, rather than opposition which is skeptical about China, not because of China per se, but because the Chinese label and the flag and the has been in a certain way hijacked, you could even say, by the Serbian president. So in a certain way, the domestic power struggle then becomes translated back, despite the Chinese neutrality, into the relationship, and that's, I think, something to watch out for. But I want to give Craig, he has a question about the issue of debts, and you've also mentioned this in your presentation. So Craig, can you activate your microphone and your camera and you ask your question, please?
Sure. Hi, thank you for your presentation. China has often been criticized for practicing debt book diplomacy. And while I don't subscribe to this myself, Montenegro's loan of over $1.3 billion is coming due next year. And there's been some signs and speculation that at the next FOCAC summit, China will forgive a large portion of Africa's debt, individual African countries' debt. So my question is, have you seen signs, or would it be in China's interest, especially in regards to their relationship with the EU, to mitigate some of that debt, which is, I think, almost 80% of its GDP? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Thanks for your question. Your question just reminds me also, Vucic, it is after the Zagreb summit said, what we want from the EU is the grant, it's not the loan. For grant is it's more favorable to the countries in this region, definitely. Regarding Montenegro, that might be the part. I've seen the Chinese workers in the region that doing the work, be at the road. China's perception of this region, in a way, always, as I say, China is still in the process to understand how the situation or how the Western Balkan countries is like. For the majority of the information Chinese or the Chinese media can get is quite limited. And the information, some of them, or the majority of them, actually is through the Western media. So you can perceive how the Chinese leaders or the Chinese bank or can make a decision how everything will going on. That actually is also based on the information they connected on the Western media report. It is only in 2017, that is in the Budapest summit, the Chinese officially recognized the concept of West Balkans. Before that, even in the Suzhou summit, there is no such of you can say geopolitical way to say Western Balkan countries. So to Montenegro, the debt, I think it's very important for when you invest some money. China said with of the business rationale, we always wanted to gain something. You can say this something can be a political support or can be economic interest. But the debt in Montenegro is over the limit, at least over the limit the EU suggests, advise this region you can have, not over, might be, if I'm wrong, this 3% of the GDP or whatever. So I think that is very important for this region also. Not only wanted to attract more investment from China, but at the same time, you have to evaluate the risk, no matter it is economic risk or political risk. You have to evaluate by yourself. As to the Chinese, I always said it's Chinese money, and I've said Chinese money is easy and no attached political conditionality. But at the same time, if you make the choice, you have to make an evaluation of what is the risk about. So regarding China's part to forgive the debt in Africa, I think the situation is a little bit, it's not a little bit different, it's totally different. For in Chinese perception, the West Balkans is one part of Europe, while China's engagement in Africa is the, we call it LCD, low development countries in that region. While in this part, we think Europe is developed region. So Chinese engagement in this part, although it is for the long term, but at the same time, Chinese government and the Chinese investment bank have to consider the risk of whether you can have the debt back or not. I think it's very important, but I don't think for the Chinese now, at least at present, react or just conduct according to the business rationale will not say, okay, I will forgive all debts in Montenegro. Business is business.
Thank you.
Thanks for the answer. Any other questions at this particular point in time? I'll give everybody a chance to think about it. I have one more question, because I've heard that also in China there are some even critical voices maybe about whether or not this investment and this loans are in fact favorable for Chinese interest in the region, or if whether China is spending too much money or providing too many resources to countries in the Western Balkans, when the benefits, the economic benefits for China is maybe limited. And I think I just want to kind of turn it in this direction, because we never, when we talk about the influence of China, we never talk about what is the interest of China in this engagement. For the European Union, it's a normative goal. It's also an economic goal. China is far, of course, it's becoming a more global actor. But to which degree is there also criticism within China, or just voices wondering whether this engagement, this financial engagement, is really the main priority or should be a priority for China? And I'm asking this particularly in the context of the pandemic, which of course has serious economic repercussions also for China. Probably, growth rates will be lower than they have been. There will be less money available, and demand also in China for overcoming the economic consequences in China, and to kind of maybe focus more on the core Chinese economic interests. So I'm just wondering, to which degree is actually, maybe we look back at 2 years and saying, oh, this was the golden age of Chinese engagement in the Western Balkans. I mean, whether we're, no matter whether we're critical or not, but that is coming under pressure or challenged, especially in light of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Florian. First of all, as I said, till the end of 2018, it's around 2,000 of Chinese projects in this region. So if you calculate it by the volume of the financial investment, it's not so big comparatively. It's not a very big financial burden for China, at least. So that's also why, even during the economic crisis, China has not said we will slow down investment in this region. And secondly, you've also mentioned that in your book, it is that China actually engaged in this part is different from Russia. It's not looking for short-term profit. It's a more long-term, looking for strategic, you can say, interest or profit. I mean, that is also more important part for China. That is and the EU in 2003 that have the comprehensive strategy partnership. For China, it is always looking for the long-term interest. So that's why I think that China wanted to invest money for infrastructure, no matter it is energy or transport. It's essential for further cooperation between China and the EU. If China actually aiming to increase the volume, the trade volume in the EU, it's the essential part of China to do that. And the third one is pandemic. As I said, the volume, the financial investment volume here in this region is very small. I don't think that it's gonna be negatively impacted by the pandemic. While for the Chinese media or for the people back to China, not many of them actually paid attention to China's financial investment or those infrastructure projects here in this region. The majority of them would like to pay attention to China's engagement in Africa. As I said, if you're looking for someone to pinpoint where is Western Balkans is, it's a problem for some of the Chinese people. So it might be a kind of a rhetorical kind of you may say trap, whatever. But for Chinese people, it's not very focused on how will the debt or how will the project will be affected by the pandemic or by the slow growth of the economic situation in China.
Thanks. So basically, if I take it right, that you do expect that basically there will be a continuation of the engagement we've seen over the last years, because it is also in many ways quite marginal. So if there's going to be discussion about major shifting of investments, it will happen elsewhere rather than in a region which is not the core interest, but rather peripheral, and as a result, probably will continue more or less in the current scale. So let me see if there's any last question from any of our participants. They've been rather shy today, but I hope we have maybe one more question coming from any of the participants. Last chance, because we are indeed slowly running out of time. So, I mean, one thing I guess maybe to kind of maybe end on is also the fact that you're giving the anecdote of meeting the Chinese worker in Montenegro. So a lot of the projects are, of course, built with Chinese workers in mind. And how do you see that? I mean, is this like, are these workers who are, is this a desirable destination? Does a Chinese worker seek to work in building highways in Montenegro? Or is this something which you get sent to by your company and you're not so happy about? I mean, how to imagine this as a prestige, or also as a perception from the Chinese side of the story, where from the side of the region we often see Chinese workers, and then there's even some resentment because, of course, the investment does not produce labor in countries where there is people who are seeking employment. So I would like to see it from that side and see how is that seen from the Chinese perspective.
Definitely, salary matters. This is the according to the capitalist way. It is always driven by the salary you can offer. It is also the case for the Chinese workers. If I can get a higher salary in, we call it work abroad, definitely I will. Although the abroad is might be the same as the home country in a mountain area, um, but if it incentivized by the high salary, definitely will go. For the Chinese companies, they have the preference for hire the Chinese workers. For comparatively, I mean, the workers, the labor cost in even in the Western Balkans countries, and compared with the Chinese workers is more favorable comparatively. I mean, the salary is lower than the local labor. Um, so it is always the case. Also, China or the Chinese company or the Chinese government always worried about one thing is the rule of law. If you have a very strict labor law in this region, it's gonna be impede the enthusiasm of the Chinese companies' engagement in this region. Back to this issue, in the last few months, there is a documentary that is called American Factory. It's also the Chinese engagement or the Chinese operation in the States. And there's one principle, one rule that the Chinese boss just emphasizes is that we don't want the labor union or else we will not invest here. So it is the case. So regarding labor regulation, it should be the case that EU and China have to figure it out, or else the enthusiasm of the Chinese engagement is going to be dented. And how the Western Balkan countries can take part in that is also very important. So I think in the near future, China also going to focus more on the know-how transfer, but it's going to be very gradual way, not in a radical way. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So we've actually run out of time. Pengfei, thank you so much for giving us this fascinating insight and presentation. I think it's a topic which will be with us for the years to come, as you said yourself, and whether or not it will be two tigers on a mountain or a panda and a tiger or whatever other combination of animals we'll have to see. But thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you all.